Hello again, everyone. We have more than 250 people tuned in and more joining right now. We will begin in just about a minute. Meanwhile, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from, what you do. We also have a poll up here on the screen to understand what you're hoping to learn in today's session. Please take a second to answer the poll question, please. All right, let's kick things off. Hello again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm your host, Ankur Arora from Corporate Finance Institute. I'm joining here from Austin, Texas in the United States. We are absolutely thrilled to have more than 286 of you live here on Zoom. We also are live streaming on YouTube. Your representation from so many different countries. So for today's conversation, we have two outstanding speakers. Our very own Scott Powell. He is the co-founder and chief content officer here at CFI. Scott has spent the better portion of his professional life making corporate finance education affordable, accessible for people in all parts of the world. And alongside Scott, we are absolutely honored to welcome Fred Swaniker, the founder of African Leadership Group, ALX, The ROOM. Fred is one of the most influential personalities on a mission to bring better education, leadership to Africa and around the world. Both Scott and Fred will be discussing a topic that's critically important for employers as well as professionals here in the corporate finance world. And before I jump into the agenda, a few quick reminders for all our attendees. This is a 1-hour event. It is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to all participants after the event. We will have a couple of polls along the way, so please be sure to take a second and participate in those polls. And during the event, we will close our chat function, so please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions for Scott and Fred. They will take 10-15 minutes towards the end of the conversation to answer questions from our audience. And let's jump right into the agenda. So we'll begin with an introduction from our esteemed speakers. They'll dive into a conversation around the changing economic landscape and the talent landscape. They will discuss the increasingly important role of a financial analyst and then discuss some new paths available to employers today to find the most qualified talent. And without further ado, welcome Fred and Scott.
Ankur, thank you so much. Fred, it is such a delight to have this fireside chat with you. So Fred, do you want to kick off and just say a bit about yourself and the African Leadership Group, ALX and The ROOM?
Yeah, thank you, Scott, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm the founder of African Leadership Group, by way of background, I'm originally from Ghana, but I left Ghana when I was 4, and every 4 years of my life, I moved to a new country in Africa. So I think of myself today as an African, not as a Ghanaian, and I have a deep passion for the continent. And my single mission in life is to unlock the potential of the continent through what I believe is our greatest assets, which is our talent. And so what we've established through the African Leadership Group is a series of institutions, from the African Leadership Academy to the African Leadership University to ALX, which all aim at doing the same thing. We select exceptional people, we develop that talent, and we connect them to opportunities. Ultimately, our hope is to develop about 3 million world-class leaders from Africa and connect them to opportunities all across Africa and around the world.
Thank you, Fred. That is just incredible. That's amazing. It's interesting also because CFI's vision is really aligned with what you're doing. So I'm one of the founders. There were 3 of us, and it was 2016. And my vision was we wanted to democratize learning, finance learning. We wanted actually to enable people anywhere in the world from any type of background to really be able to upskill and get jobs that they were dreaming of. And so it's interesting because as we've grown and impacted more people, our vision has become more of being an enduring resource for finance and banking professionals around the globe. Now, in my career, I started my career, I'm actually here I'm sitting in Vancouver, Canada right now. So greetings from Vancouver. I started my career in finance in London, England, got to live in New York and Hong Kong, but I'm originally from Vancouver here in Canada, and that's where we established CFI. And I've had the real privilege, part of the content that we've created at CFI is not only applied and practical so that you can be role ready, but it comes from my experience and my colleagues' experience working with leading financial services firms around the world. And some of them you see on the screen. But that's probably enough about me. I'm interested in beginning our chat. So we're going to start the chat though with a poll. So our first topic that we're going to be looking at is the changing economic and talent landscape. But Jess, could you show the first poll? And the question is, what do you think is the estimated global talent shortfall by 2030? You're not seeing this yet, probably, but we have 23 million is winning right now. 48 million is in second place. Let's just, we just want a few more people to vote. We have about half our participants have voted so far. Okay, the votes are still coming in, but let's share the results. So in first place, 23 million. In second place, 48 million. It looks, and then in third place, 85 million. And then in fourth place with 10% is 5 million. Hey, Fred, I know we're going to start talking about the changing economic talent landscape, but I'd love you to talk about the stat. I think you know more about the stat than I do even. What is the global talent shortfall?
Yeah, the global talent shortfall from different research reports that have been done by the McKinsey Global Institute and the World Economic Forum and several other analysts, they predict that there will be a shortage of between 50 to 85 million jobs. And most consensus is more around the 85 million jobs. That will be where there'll be a shortage of talent for those roles, for 50 to 85 million roles between now and 2030. And I think that's just talking about roles that are kind of related to the trends that are shaping the world around the digital transformation. So these are, therefore that means that when you look at employment more broadly, the numbers will be much bigger than that, right? But this is about sort of roles that relate in some shape or form to the evolving nature of data and analytics and technology and all some of the disruptions that is taking place in the world today.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of CFI's clients are experiencing that talent shortage right now, and in fact, even we at CFI are struggling. So I'm not surprised to that stat at all. So let's begin our chat. Our first area of chat is really talking about the changing economic and talent landscape. So, Fred, what are you seeing in terms of what are some of the major forces affecting the talent landscape at the moment?
Well, I think the talent landscape is really being affected by, what this era of the fourth industrial revolution that everyone's talking about, right? So this is really talking about the advent of big data, the Internet of Things, cloud computing, cybersecurity, augmented reality, autonomous systems, simulation, additive manufacturing. You have all of these trends that are shaping the world because of the increasing computing power that we all have in our hands in the mobile phone. I mean, the smartphone today is more powerful than the computers that were used to send the first people to the moon by NASA, right? Yeah. It's producing a lot of data. The proliferation of sensors. Sensors are put all over, in all kinds of things now. And so you have every 30 seconds, these sensors are getting a piece of data about a piece of machinery, a building, some agricultural a process, and you have all of this data that's coming out, right? Customers are purchasing things with mobile and on e-commerce, and this is producing and then of course you add into the cloud and so forth. So the infrastructure and data and increasing computing power, it's allowing the entire world to be transformed. This has been accelerated as well by the COVID pandemic, right? So this was already happening pre-COVID, but COVID accelerated the pace of digital transformation. And it is making things more automated, and robotics and so forth is taking place. And so every company now suddenly finds themselves having to become a tech company. Every bank is now a tech company. Every insurance company is now a tech company. Every, school, hospital is now a tech company, right? So they have to transform themselves, and they have to transform the way they interact with customers, and and the way in which decisions are made, and the way in which they manage organizations. Every company is grappling with this today.
Yeah, it's interesting, Fred, because again, I totally am aligned in terms of the pandemic also really accelerated trends that were already there. And it's amazing. I love the language you use, that almost every company is a tech company, because but I think also the pandemic showed that the technology was at a stage that actually we could operate remotely with technology, and we need to lean into technology even to grow. It's interesting. So if you think a bit longer term though, so if we're talking about what's happening now, some immediate changes, what's your view on kind of the long-term global impact if we look out, 10 years or even 5 or 6 years from now? Do you have a view on where this is going?
Yeah, so I think firstly, there's just like we talked about earlier, massive need for talent which has the skills to thrive in this new world, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that every company needs to go through a digital transformation. They need to think about the way they design products, the way they interact with customers, the way they manage themselves, and that's another trend that's happening, and that's a long-term trend. Thirdly, what the pandemic has done is it has changed the place and format in which we all work. So suddenly, labor markets have become much more global. Before, you had to be physically present in a given country to work for a company in that country. Now, you can be a company in Brazil and hire a financial analyst living in Germany or in South Africa. You can be a software engineer in, Kenya and working for Siemens in Germany. And the pandemic has flattened the world for talent. And made it possible for to break down some barriers that have historically been there, like immigration and work permits and things like that. So talent can move much more fluidly, and can much more in a virtual world. And what also we're seeing is that the companies are having to compete a lot more for this talent, because it's a lot more scarce, right? Because these are new skills, and there isn't enough supply of it. But what you're also going to see is a lot of reskilling, where companies are going to take talent that they already have and retrain them, reskill them into these new skills that are needed for the 21st century. So there's a lot of turmoil and disruption, but in that moment, a lot of opportunities are also being created. And everyone is navigating right now.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of our B2B, our business clients, are saying the exact same thing as you said. And what's interesting, I'll just anecdotally, even here at CFI, I look back pre-pandemic, and we had this foolish notion that everyone for CFI needed to be based in Vancouver, Canada. And what I'm going to tell you is that it was the pandemic was so transformational for us that we are a remote first company. We have an employee in Mauritius. We have an employee in Kenya. We have employees in Poland. And really, we've experienced the firsthand benefits of seeing the globe as a talent pool, as opposed to looking geographically. So I think it's a trend that is only going to accelerate. And I think once people realize the quality of the talent they can get by seeing the globe as a talent pool, they don't want to go back. We would never go back to hiring in a geographic location for the sake of it. Really interesting comments.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, companies can find much more diverse talent. They can find much more affordable talent. They can find talent with skills that they no longer have. So, for a company, the world is your oyster, because now you can access incredible people from all around the world, and have less of a constraint. And for the talent as well, the world is your oyster, because now you can work for all these great companies without having to worry about getting work permits and traveling and all that stuff. So it's really an exciting opportunity for both companies and talent, but you have to reposition yourself. You can't keep doing things the same way and expect to be able to thrive in this new world. You have to adapt.
No, totally. Okay, so let's move to the second part of our chat, and that is to really think about something near and dear to my heart, the elevated role of a financial analyst. And I've seen profound changes. But Fred, I would like to hear from you first. So, and then but maybe one, I'm an extrovert, and I will tend to want to talk forever about this. But what are you seeing? And then I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing, because I'm an old guy. I'm the oldest person at CFI. I started my career in the late 80s, and the role of a financial analyst is so dramatically different, and the differences are accelerating. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to defer to you, Fred, though. What are you seeing in terms of the role of the financial analyst?
Sure, Scott. I mean, you're right. The role of the financial analyst is changing drastically, today and in the future, the skills required to be an effective financial analyst are vastly different from where they were 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, some of the trends that we're seeing is that, in the past, a lot of the finance profession in general was seen much more around being a sort of a compliance partner, right? Where it was around, are your financial statements in line with IFRS rules? Are they in line with global accepted accounting practices with GAAP? Are you issuing your financial statements on time? And it was a lot about compliance and doing and also calculating financial ratios and providing a lot of information that way. What you're seeing today is now that business leaders need much more of a business partner than a compliance partner, and they're looking for someone who can help them think out of the box, not within the rules. Right, someone who can break the rules, who can think differently, and not just help me to follow rules. Right, so I think that's one thing where they're looking for a lot more creativity and innovation from finance roles than just tell me whether what I've done is in line with IFRS rules or not. Right. The second thing you're seeing is increasing automation. So a lot of the roles that before an accountant or a financial analyst would do manually, are now being automated. Right, so computers can aggregate all the data they're getting from different places because of increasing a lot of transactions are electronic, and they can produce your income statement and your balance sheet and your cash flow statement and even do some basic financial analysis. So it calls now for human beings to really add a lot more value and to be able to now leverage those automation tools to add more insight than the computers can do. And so it requires much more human judgment and the ability to understand strategy and operations, and to be able to connect the dots that the data is telling you, to really help make better decisions and to pull out insights. The third thing that we see changing is the finance profession used to be about very much giving a static picture of performance. So this is how you did, your income statement on this date looked like this, or your balance sheet on this date looked like this, or this is how you did, last year. And it's very backward looking as in a way, right? Today, you are really, because of all the data that's coming out, to be an effective financial analyst, you should be able to give continuous or real-time insight, right? And that's not just talking about the past, but that's talking about the future. Right? Help me see where I need to go. Help me see where I'm going. What are the trends telling me so I can predict things? This is now where you can start to build models and to do predictive analysis and to really help, to draw from the inference from the data that you have to make predictions about the future, and to be able to constantly monitor where you are in a given day, in a given moment, because you have access to all this real-time data from all the different data sources that are coming. And then it's really shifting from just being an accountant or finance professional to be more of a financial analyst and a business intelligence analyst, right? Where you are really thinking about giving organizations business intelligence, and you're leveraging big tools like data science and analytics, and even, Internet of Things, and connecting a lot of operational elements of a business to the financial elements and decision making, right? So you have to be much more savvy with with all kinds of technology today. To be an effective financial analyst, you need to think about data visualization. You need to be able to leverage tools like Python. You've got to be able to just go beyond just using Excel to be able to effectively play as a financial analyst. But most importantly, I think the biggest change is the mindset. You really have to change the way you see yourself as a financial analyst and how you add value to an organization, because the world has changed and you need to change as a financial analyst to be competitive today.
Yeah, wow. That was extremely comprehensive. You literally stole all my thunder. Which is, I'm not surprised, because the story is a global story and the story is very, very clear. There is a ton of automation out there. When I started my career, I literally didn't have a laptop. I had paper, pencils, and a calculator. It was all about the past. It was all about that static preparation, performance metrics. It wasn't forward looking. Then we moved into Excel. But even if I think about 5 or 10 years ago, a financial analyst 10 years ago could have got by maybe with a bit of understanding of Visual Basic, which is an Excel coding language. Now, if you're a financial analyst and you don't understand things like Power BI, Power Query, Python, you mentioned Python, the R program, Tableau, R programming language. If you don't have those as core skills, you are not competitive in the market. The market right now is craving. We talked about competition for roles and the shortfall in jobs. The huge shortfall is in truly forward-thinking financial analysts that have skilled up with the tools needed to add value. And I could list those tools again, but it's really around, Fred, as you said, business intelligence and data analytics. It's no longer enough to be able to calculate the ratio, because as you said, software can do that for you. And so I love the language that you used of changing that mindset. But where we're seeing the most growth in our business is actually in the business intelligence data analyst space, which we're not surprised at all, because that's why we're offering those courses, because we know that's where the market is going. The other thing I would say is that, as to build on what you said, is that the hardest thing for a lot of financial analysts, especially financial analysts who are already in jobs, is to change that mindset. There's often a mindset of ticking the box, doing the calculation, and not thinking outside of the box. And certainly our experience shows that the folks who are successful as financial analysts really are business partners to the organization, as opposed to compliance officers, which is a more traditional finance role. Do you want to add anything, Fred, to what I've said? I don't, any additional comments?
No, I think, you've captured it very well. You added to, what I said as well. So no, nothing else to add.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So for those people who are here are thinking about their careers, I think you know where Fred and I stand. It's really important to start leaning into, if you haven't already, that business intelligence and data analytics, because that's where you can make a difference, and that's where you can truly add value, and that's where a lot of the jobs are from what we're seeing in the market. Okay, let's go to our third topic area. This topic area is called we're going to do a poll, aren't we? I think we're doing a poll. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ankur.
Yes, we'll be launching the poll.
Cool. So this poll is, to what extent has your organization's mindset shifted about remote work in the past 2 years? Keep going. We have probably about only 40% of our audience on Zoom at least voting. So we'll just give you another 30 seconds or so. It's interesting. You're not maybe seeing the poll, but right now significantly is in the lead. But I was surprised. Okay, let's share those results. Perfect. So you hopefully can see them on the screen. Significantly, 40% of the people here logged into Zoom have said that your organization's mindset has shifted about remote work quite significantly. 15% transformationally, 28% a little, and interesting, 17% said not at all. It's interesting. I'm going to, again, defer to Fred first, but all I'm going to say is it's very different, our audience today, than what CFI's clients are telling us. And in fact, our experience at CFI, I've already kind of alluded to this. We went from a company that thought everyone had to be geographically in the same location to a remote first company, and we're never going back. It's been it's transformational for us, but it's been transformational for our business and what we've been able to achieve. We've accelerated growth simply by changing our whole mindset around remote first. So let's actually have a bit of a conversation around new paths available to employers in this new landscape. Okay, so Fred, I'm going to turn to you first and just ask, hopefully, we could let's talk about remote first, but then I wanted to explore maybe opportunities that are available to employers, and really think about from an employer's hat, what's possible there. But let's talk, maybe we can glue those two conversations together. Let's talk about remote first.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic suddenly opened up talent markets for people all around the world and for companies as well. I think during the pandemic we saw an explosion of companies that before had been only in person and suddenly became 100% remote, and they started hiring talent from all around the world and so forth. But I think that there have been a couple of challenges with that. The one is that many companies were not ready with a culture of remote work. You can't just do remote work without changing your culture. There's different ways of doing work, asynchronously. You've got to think about how do you engage people when they're not in the same place? How do you create equity? And how do you account for people's time zones and personal lives and everything? So you have to really think more deliberately. And a lot of people just went to remote without thinking about how they would change their culture. And so some companies are finding challenges around that. The second thing is also, you have, I think companies have seen there were some complexities with things like, employer record and tax, and, if you employ someone in other countries, does it create a tax liability for you? Who's the employer record? So there's been an explosion of a lot of, providers like Deal and, Remote and all these companies that are trying to fill that gap to allow companies to hire talent all around the world and still be in compliance with, employment rules and tax rules and things like that. And then I think what you're also seeing is that people are seeing the limits of remote work, right? So what remote work has been able to do is has opened up access to talent all around the world, and you can find incredible people, often at a lower cost, and who don't all have to live in the same place. So before, for example, if you think about just software engineers, if you went in Silicon Valley before, then you didn't really have a career, right? That was kind of the perception. Now you can be a software engineer sitting in Ethiopia, in Nigeria, in Argentina, and you can access the best jobs in the world, right? And companies have realized that they can access talent all over the world, as long as they can adapt the way they work. You're seeing all that, but there has been the challenge that there's a limit to what you can do online. It's harder sometimes to build culture. Sometimes people don't have the infrastructure to work effectively. You can't read the body language. Communication becomes a bit harder, especially when you're working across time zones. And so what you're ending up with is some sort of a blended approach, where I think most companies are realizing that you need to do the blend of online and in-person. So for example, something that we do in ALI, in the ALX and The ROOM, the parent company, is we gather our top executive team every 4 months for 1 week in person. And we spend time as the executives just for 4 days, and we bring the next level of leaders for another 4 days, and then we just co-locate for another 4 days, just so that you can have some of the unexpected interactions, the water cooler conversations, the things that sparked innovation, because people are seeing that it might be easy to collaborate online, but it's hard to innovate online. And some of those unscripted, unexpected conversations that happen when you're kind of just in a space with someone that you can't do online. And then we do that 3 times a year, and then once a year we gather the whole company for an in-person experience, right? And we're also giving budgets to our team so that they can gather. And some of the savings that we're getting from not paying rent and not traveling as much, we're repurposing that for some of these retreats and so forth to kind of try and get that mix. So I think that the jury is still out about the extent to which you can be fully remote or fully in person. I think there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of tools that are emerging, and that are and there'll be many different formulas for success. But what is clear is that we're not going back to the old ways of working, because companies have opened up, and so has the eyes of talent.
It's interesting because, again, our experience at CFI and what we're hearing from clients is very much aligned to what you said. It's still a journey. We're having to experiment. So again, we're bringing people together occasionally. You talk about body language, but it's getting that balance right. And I think we're not at the end of that journey yet at CFI. But as you said, we're never going back to everyone in person. There's some hybrid that we're really excited about, and we keep tweaking what we're doing, trying to get the benefits of being in person and also the benefits of being remote. Let's talk about employers, though. This is, it says new paths available to employers. We've talked about the global, the fact that a lot of employers are now looking at the globe as a global talent pool. The other thing you flagged that I was also going to flag is there's been an explosion of providers who can navigate employment laws so that you're compliant with whatever the employment laws in the country where you have that worker, which has made it much easier, for example, for us to tap that talent pool. But if you had to think about, let's say, what would be your top 3 important things that employers should be thinking about now? And maybe because I'll leave it there, but because I'm at CFI, I'm kind of wearing that hat of also the financial analyst, but you may want to speak to it generally.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about as an employer, one is, how are you completely retooling your workforce for the world of the future and not the world of the past? So that means reskilling some of the talent that you have in some of the skills that are necessary to compete in this 20 moment, and then hiring in new talent that has some of these skills that you lack. So, if you're not thinking about product and software engineering and data science and cloud computing and financial analysts and business intelligence and cybersecurity and all these trends and Internet of Things, robotics, if you're not thinking about how these things affect your company, and if you're not repositioning yourself and digitally transforming yourself, you will be disrupted. So better disrupt yourself than be disrupted by others, and better shift to the times and survive and thrive than to be left behind and suddenly find yourself bankrupt and out of business. So I every business leader today needs to really be thinking about that. Every HR department needs to be thinking about this, and actively seeking to attract some of these new skills and to reskill their workforce. That's number one. Number two, how do you position your brand as an employer to attract some of this talent? And so you have to really think about employer rebranding. How do you make sure that your brand is a global brand now? Because before, you could be happy being a tiny company, in Iowa, and you would have local talent from Iowa, right? Because they only knew about you and you only knew about them. Now your local talent there is looking all over the world for jobs, right? And if you don't become a global brand, you don't start to have a presence on social media and other platforms that can talk to, and if you're not building networks in other organizations and other countries, you will really struggle to find talent, because talent is now much more global than ever, right? And so you need to make sure that you're visible and have an employer brand that attracts talent. And then finally, you need to think about, how do you create a hospitable work environment for people of different cultures that you never interacted with before, and people in different time zones, people who have different work habits, and how do you think about online versus offline and hybrid, all these things that we're just talking about. So that, okay, it's one thing to brand yourself. It's another thing to attract the talent based on that brand, but how do you keep them? How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them excited? How do you keep them motivated? And how do you keep them productive? Because now you have all of these lines of communication and people are struggling to get time zones right, and they're not in the same place, and there's a chance for miscommunication and confusion. And so how do you create an environment where people thrive and can do their best work, and ultimately that they stay with you and you're able to retain this talent that you've worked so hard to find?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do have a follow-up question for you, but certainly one of the things that we are noticing is that employers are having to go to the talent rather than in the past, the talent would come to them. Just kind of a big macro theme. And it's an employees market. As we said, there's shortfall and people are not signing up for just the first employer that knocks on the door. They're looking for a company that is aligned maybe with their values, a company that is going to upskill them, a company that they're proud to work for. And so I really want to reiterate the need to really, as a company, as an employer, to think about your brand. And it's interesting because even at CFI, I was very intentional. It was my name. We were global. I didn't want Wall Street in the name. I didn't want anything to do with Europe. It was global, Corporate Finance Institute. There was an intention around that because our intention was to democratize learning, not for people in one geography, but for people anywhere at any time. So that really resonated with me. But I'm going to be more specific because, you talked about the need to not only be attractive to talent, but also the need to retain. And so my follow-up question, because I'm really curious, is what do you have some ideas of what are the key things that employers need to be doing to retain their folks?
Yeah, so I think that one of the most important things that employers need to do to retain their folks is to give people a sense of purpose. For both, new talent that's entering the workforce, young talent, the Gen Zs as they call them, or the millennials and so forth. Many folks of this generation have seen their parents work for 20, 30, 40 years and, ended up either being retrenched or, because of the financial crisis, they didn't have enough money to retire properly, and just seen that, there's a lot more to life than work, right? And so they want to make sure that they're devoting their lives to something that a purpose is meaning, and they're just a lot more conscious about the environment and impact of organizations and so forth. So I think you need to really clearly tie in what you're doing to how it makes the world a better place, right? How does this actually transform lives? How does this improve conditions for people, and how does this help the environment and so forth? So clarifying your purpose beyond just making money, right, is going to ensure you attract people there and to retain them. People will not stay in a place where they feel that their organization is doing something is not contributing positively to society. And then for those maybe who are not so new to the workforce, I think the pandemic forced people, when they saw a lot of death around them and, all the challenges of the pandemic, it made them go back to the drawing board and reassess what was important to them. So there's also whole talk about the Great Resignation. A lot of people resigned and, changing jobs, looking for new things, and again, chasing that purpose, right? So it's not just a phenomenon for young talent. It's also even for people who are mature, that they're starting to reevaluate their purpose in life and see whether it connected to the purpose that they saw in the organization. So purpose is, I think, a very important thing that organizations need to think about to retain talent. Of course, the other things are things that maybe have always been there, which is how do you give people a chance to grow, right? So throwing people in the deep end, research shows that to effectively develop your skills, only 10% of it can be learned in the classroom. 20% comes from peers and mentors and coaches, and 70% comes from experience. So people want experiences to be thrown in the deep end, to be challenged, to be empowered, to give, so that they can actually do things that give them that experience, so that they can grow their skills and their careers, right? And so giving people challenging assignments, often putting them in roles where they're not ready for, I think grows them. Finally, I think people are looking for mentorship and feedback and coaching, right? So that they get a sense of what they're doing or what they're not doing well. And organizations that grow people will be those who are able to do that. So the final thing is flexibility, right? People don't want you to box them into, one thing. They want to be able to work, come into the office sometimes, work remotely other times, work on this project, work on that project. So, you being a lot more, just like companies have always been customer centric, I think you have to become a lot smarter about being employee centric as well. So that you think about the experience of your employees and how do you make sure that just like you retain your customers by thinking about designing great customer experiences, how do you retain your employees by designing great employee experiences? And I think that way they'll stay with you.
I need to stop letting you answer the question first because you steal my thunder. That's awesome. Because listen, because it's funny because when I was reflecting on the question, the first thing was purpose. The second thing, you didn't say this directly, was like being valued and being acknowledged.
Yes.
The third thing was the opportunity to grow, right? Which you said. And then the fourth thing that came to mind was just the opportunity to get feedback, to learn, to build new skills. But when you're doing that, you need a mentor, right? You can't do that on your own. There's a continuous feedback loop. And what really resonated to me, because I'm in the learning space, and I'm just going to reiterate it because it's really important, is when you learn a new skill, we at CFI take learning really, we're very passionate about learning. But you want to remember that 70, 20, 10 that Fred just talked about. Because what the research shows is we at CFI try to help you with the 10 and some of the 20, but where you build the skills is in the workplace. So employers need to not just send people on a training course or send them to CFI, but they have to create opportunities for the person to apply those skills at their desk, at their laptop. And sometimes I think people are missing a trick. And when learning doesn't happen in the workplace, what we find is because the employer's forgotten the 70%. They think the training is all they need when the learning actually gets cemented into a habit by doing it over and over again and refining the skill and building the skill. So I really appreciate those comments, Fred. That was really helpful. Okay, so if you're Fred, before we go, we're going to go to just general Q&A. We've had a lot of our participants ask a ton of questions. And so behind the scenes, we have an amazing team, including Ankur, who kicked us off, who've been going through them and trying to identify some questions for us to answer, Fred. So, and one of the things we want to commit to is that we're going to try to answer all the questions that have been posted, but not in this fireside chat. We're going to answer questions offline on some of the offline forum. And by the way, you will get a recording of this, and we'll be answering more of those questions in offline forum, but we've tried to identify a few. So let's go to, we've created a fireside chat slide. So I hope you're feeling warm as you look at this slide. And Fred, I know neither you or I've seen these questions, but I'm going to just do a couple, and I'm going to maybe do one for you. Then there's one that's directed at me, maybe, and then we'll do one for both, and we'll just see how we go. I'll be mindful of the time. I'll give us about 10 minutes to answer questions, and then we'll do some final remarks, if that's okay. So here's one for you, Fred. People have been commenting, they loved hearing what themes you're seeing. But the question was, are we seeing these same challenges throughout all industries? And I don't know what all industries means, but maybe could you comment on that? How widespread, I guess, another way to reframe it is, how widespread are these challenges based on what you're seeing?
Yeah, I would say that these challenges are extremely widespread. I mean, there's no way that you can simply ignore these trends when the entire world is changing, right? Unless you have been living under, a bunker for the last 3 years as an organization, these trends are affecting you, right? Everyone has been affected by the COVID pandemic. Everyone has been affected by being affected by digital disruption and customer expectations and social media and robotics and Internet of Things and everything. So you either adapt and thrive, or you simply, become extinct, right? So it's evolution, right? Those who survived, survival of the fittest, they adapted to the times. Those who didn't make it are the ones who didn't adapt. So of course you can choose to ignore these trends as a company. But if you ignore it, then that means you're making the decision to go out of business, And so most organizations, therefore, are being affected by this. And it's just a matter of, what choices do you make? Because awareness precedes choice. Once you're aware of all these trends, then you make different choices. But if you just choose to ignore it and say, well, I don't know, everyone wants to sell to them online, but I'm not going to build an e-commerce website. I'm going to wait for you to come to my store. Soon you won't have any customers and you'll be dead, or, need to make decisions using data and business intelligence, and all your competitors are doing that and they're getting advantage of it. They're capturing market share. You're like, hey, how come everyone's stealing my business? Well, they're using data analytics to figure out things, and you're not changing the way you do things, then you're going to go out of business. So that's kind of how simple it is.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree. So here's a question for me. I guess we have job seekers joining us today. There's a question on, and there might have been several, but one of the questions was, do you have any advice for job seekers on how to prepare and stay competitive? So I could probably talk for 10 minutes on this. I'm just going to tell you a bit of a trend. This is a long-term trend. So when I started my finance career, it was in London, England. And when I went for my job interviews, I didn't need to know anything about finance. The idea was that you joined the company, they would train you. The last 30 years has seen a dramatic change in that, such that employers are now expecting people to come to jobs with the skills. And it was one reason we actually set up CFI, was we realized that there were a lot of learners who couldn't get the jobs because employers wanted people to have the skills, even at the age of 20, 21, rather than train them up. And so one of the big messages is to be continuously learning, continuously building your skills, looking at, we've talked about some trends. If you aren't exploring business, if you want a job as a financial analyst, and you're not exploring and building your skill sets in business intelligence, so that's Power BI, Tableau, your Python, R, understanding regression analysis. If you're not building those skill sets, then you're going to become, kind of building what Fred said, less and less competitive over time. We at CFI intentionally are trying to be at the leading edge of where this is going, because we want to support learners, not for jobs where they've been, but where we see those jobs going in the future. So that would be my first thing. And also just take on a curious mindset. I mean, maybe I'm in learning. So I naturally love learning. And I don't mean love learning in a box. I'm naturally curious about a lot of things. And as Fred alluded to, a financial analyst isn't just someone who needs to know finance. And also, it's not someone who just needs to know business intelligence. It's someone who needs to be a strategic thinker, an out-of-the-box thinker. And so you want to be thinking about, how do I strengthen my muscles around things like that? How do I become a better strategic thinker? How do I become more of an out-of-box thinker? How do I become a more creative thinker? And part of that's about self-awareness and, acknowledging, where am I now? Can I find a mentor, for example, who can help me? So I can keep going. I'm very passionate about this, but that would be my advice for job seekers. And the other thing I would say is, if it's a financial analyst job, there's a couple of things you want to keep in mind. Your interview questions will be both technical and they'll be about cultural fit. And so you want to make sure that your technical questions, you're really prepped for technical questions. Because that's how you're going to get those questions, because they want to know if you really have that skill. So, if you're applying for a job where you need R, programming language, or Python, be prepared to be asked detailed questions on those languages. So anyway, I'll stop because we have more questions. Unless, Fred, do you want to add anything to what I said?
No, I fully agree with you.
Okay, cool. So here's another question for you. Do you think upskilling is now seen as a strategic priority by organizations alongside technology investments? So that's a long question, but do you think upskilling is now seen as a strategic priority by organizations?
That's a very good question. So I think a lot of companies pay lip service to it, and they say that it's something that they want to do and that they, prioritize. But in reality, most organizations are not doing it as anywhere near where they should be, given the pace of digital transformation that is happening. So I think too many companies say that they want to upskill their workforce, but they're not backing up with concrete actions like selecting great partners like the CFI who can upskill their workers, or and giving their talent time to to go and engage in additional learning, or giving them a day off, or weekends or evenings or whatever, to support them to upskill, and then doing the coaching and mentoring, the 20% that we talked about, and then giving them really challenging experience to learn on the job, etc. So most companies are paying lip service to it. And one thing that always I think prevents companies from fully leaning into this is that they're worried that once they upskill someone, that the person will leave, because they'll suddenly become more competitive. But there's a good as well, if I train people, they'll leave. But then it's even worse that if you don't train them and then they stay, because who are on your organization, we're an organization who don't have capabilities to keep up with the changing world. So long and short of it is that there's a few companies that are doing this well. Most companies are not doing this at all, and simply paying lip service. And I think that there's a great and sometimes they'll just go and find someone outside of the organization who they think has the skills that they need, but that person doesn't have the context of the organization. They don't have the culture, they don't have the history. So there's obviously a balance that's required, but I think companies are not doing enough to upskill their workforce.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that, because again, because I've been in the finance industry for so long, if you're someone in a finance team in a company and you're in your 40s, you weren't trained in the tools that you need to survive. And I have lots of colleagues who are in the 40s and 50s who have decided to resign. And the companies they work for lost amazing talent because they didn't have the opportunity to upskill. And they knew that they should understand tools like Power BI, Power Query, and so on, but there were no opportunities. And so I recall one person saying he felt like a dinosaur and that there was no opportunity. But what really resonated with me is, he brought organizational knowledge, and there was a missed opportunity there to upskill. And one of the things in finance is there's huge swaths or tiers of people in their late 30s and 40s who are getting less and less competitive, and their companies, in service to them and to service to the companies, should be upskilling those folks, not just looking at those new junior folks coming in their 20s. And I think these 30 and 40 somethings are getting missed by many organizations, and they're losing amazing talent. Okay, Fred, let's do another one. I'm watching the time. Ankur's going to kick me off in a second if I'm not careful. Here's a question. This is a big question. So, and it's to both of us. So Fred, I'll let you answer it first. If you could sum everything up, what are some ways for finance professionals to succeed in this changing talent landscape? So maybe just a couple of big things that come to mind.
Yeah, so I think some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. So number one, change your mindset. Realize that we're not in Kansas anymore, as in that, the Wizard of Oz movie, right? Think about the current trends, change, really adapt your mindset, see how, really explore how you can become more agile and adaptable, and think about some of these new expectations that organizations have of you as a financial analyst. Number two is, I would say, upskill, continuously learn these tools and these techniques, like, Scott was talking about, can you use Tableau? Can you use Power BI, business intelligence, Python, R? Are you really developing your modeling skills? Really helping companies with the analytics that they need to look forward and not just look backwards, and to give them real-time insights and so forth, right? And are you, thinking outside of the box so that you can really help companies to shape the future, not just tell them about their past. So upskilling yourself with the tools and techniques. And then the other thing I would say is networks and relationships. Build networks, build relationships that can open doors for you. Research shows that 85% of jobs are never advertised. They're filled by word of mouth. So who you know matters as much as what you know. So spend time building relationships online, offline, that can open doors. And then finally, I'll say think global, right? Before, if you were looking for work, you had to look in your city, in your country, but now you can look anywhere in the world. So that suddenly opens up massive opportunities for you. But then you obviously have to position yourself, because when you go onto the global stage, you're competing with talent all around the world as well. So you need to be on top of your game, be professional, have good infrastructure to show up for interviews, to deliver the work for your clients, and to really work hard, because you're competing with millions of people in China, billions of people in India, and everyone in the US, all in the same playing field. So how do you make sure that when you show up on the global stage, you are truly globally competitive?
And I'm going to say everything Fred said, and I'm going to struggle, but a couple of other things. One of the things that's I want to build on that upskilling and being naturally curious, because one of the things that you want to be naturally curious about is, what are the trends in finance? We've been talking about business intelligence and data analytics, but we at CFI try to be at the head of these trends. So we're always looking at what trends there are. So ESG is a very, very large trend globally that financial analysts need to worry about: environmental, social, and governance practices. And so you should be thinking about, how do I upskill myself in things like ESG? You could talk about fintech. We're actually launching a fintech certification next year. Crypto. When you're thinking about the finance world, one of the things you do want to think about is read. You get excited about what's happening in the finance markets, and be curious about these things that are coming on. And certainly we at CFI are trying to support people in those new areas so that they can upscale, as we said, not for a job 10 years ago, but the jobs of the future. So that's probably what I'd say. Fred, before I hand over to Ankur, I'm just going to say, any final thoughts? You have the last word.
No, I mean, just really that it's an exciting time to be a professional today. There are many, many more opportunities than there are challenges. So it's up to you to change your mindset, position yourself to capture these opportunities. And if you do, it's going to be a great next phase of your career. And then for companies who are on this webinar, there are many, many tools that can accelerate your growth. Yes, we're sitting in a moment where there's a rising political instability. Global instability on the geopolitics front. We have rising inflation. We have economies, experiencing recession, and the stock market's down, interest rates rising. It is a complex time, but this is now the time more than ever when you need to have the best finance professionals on your side, right? Where you need to really have the best tools to make the better decisions right now, and to position yourself so that you can thrive in this moment, because in every crisis, there's opportunity. And so if you are able to leverage the best talent, which is now available to you globally, you can really transform yourself and actually thrive in this era, and not go extinct.
Fred, it's been a real delight having this fireside chat with you. And so let me hand over to Ankur for final few words, and thank you all for attending. Ankur, over to you.
Scott, Fred, thank you both. That was an insightful conversation in an hour. Some clear takeaways for what the mindset and the focus for both employers and job seekers should be here. Just a couple of reminders for everyone. The recording will be sent as a follow-up to all registrants. After the Zoom event ends, you will be redirected to a survey in your browser window. Please give us feedback so we can continue to improve our events. It's been an honor having you both and our audience join us. That concludes today's event. Thank you so much. I wish everyone the best. Keep learning, keep growing. And please visit theroom.com. Yes, thank you. Theroom.com to learn more about the future of talent. Both ALX and The Room are doing incredible things, and there's a incredible amount of fresh talent with new path, unconventional paths available there. So we encourage all employers, everybody, job seekers as well as employers, to go check out theroom.com. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.